Today's conversation is one that I think every woman, especially high achieving women, needs to hear because we don't actually talk enough about failure. We talk about success, we talk about growth, we talk about resilience, but we don't always unpack what happens in that moment when something doesn't go the way we planned. And more importantly, how we internalize it. Today, I'm sitting down with Deborah Riegel, executive coach, leadership communication expert, and the author of 10 books, including her newest release, Aim High and Bounce Back. Deborah has spent over 2 decades working with leaders at the highest levels, teaching communication, leadership, and performance at top institutions like Wharton and Columbia. But what really stood out to me about her latest work is the research. She and her co-author studied over 1,100 women across 60 countries, and what they found is something I think so many of us will recognize instantly, that women don't just experience failure, we personalize it, we ruminate on it, and we often turn it into a system failure, but we turn it into a story about our own worth. And in a world where women are stepping into leadership, entrepreneurship, and even shaping the future of AI, that pattern becomes incredibly important to understand and to shift. So today we're talking about failure, but more than that, we're talking about how to bounce instead of shatter. Deborah, I'd love to start here. You've spent over 20 years working in leadership communication and coaching.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, it's amazing. So what originally drew you into this work, and what have you observed about how women show up differently in leadership conversations?
So, what originally brought my attention to the topic of failure, and in particular failure in women, is that I've been coaching across genders for 21 years. And I was noticing that when I was speaking to leaders who were men, more often than not, they would experience a setback or a failure or a mistake or a misstep, and they would deal with it, and then they would move on. What I found was, in many cases, for the women that I was coaching, they would have a failure and they would ruminate, personalize, catastrophize, and then get stuck there. And it was much harder to get them to move beyond a failure and to bounce back from it than it was with the men that I was coaching. And so I was really curious about this phenomenon, about why this happens, what's going on from the time, a woman is a girl, what's happening early on in her life to have her feel so differently about failure that she gets stuck. And as you so artfully put it, shatters instead of bounces back. And so that was really the question we were looking to answer.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's such an important question. I'm glad you guys did this research. So you guys researched women in failure. Your new book is rooted in
Yes.
research. And so you guys looked at 1,100 different women in 60 different
1,100
countries.
women
Wow,
across 60 countries. So this is not North American research. This
this
is
is
global
incredible.
research where we surveyed women across, socioeconomic strata, across countries, across, education levels, you name it. And we found that women, like we experienced maybe in our own lives, that women were much more likely to internalize and say, I wasn't enough, than they were to externalize and say the system didn't set me up for failure. They were more likely to stay stuck than to catalyze. And they were less likely to treat failure as data and treat failure as a part of their identity rather than an event.
Oh, that's so interesting. So what were some of the most surprising or even confronting findings from that research? Anything specific?
I would say some of the things that were most confronting to us was how early we are conditioned, women are conditioned to have this really fraught relationship with failure. So we found that it typically starts around age 5 or 6 when you're in a classroom. And what we found is that girls are more likely to be recognized and rewarded for perfect behavior, whereas boys are rewarded for taking bold risks in the classroom. So that's
Wow.
the first place where we learn that we have to behave and perform and be perfect as opposed to, swinging, shooting for the stars. The second thing that struck us was that 43% of girls quit sports. And as a result of quitting sports, girls are losing access to one of the most important places where we learn to fail and bounce back, which is on the court or the field, right? And or the diamond, wherever it is that we're playing sports. And then another statistic that really showed up was that by age 13, most girls are on social media. And when a girl is on social media, she learns that she needs to perform a certain way for an audience to approve of her and let her in. And if she doesn't behave perfectly, not only will people not let her in or not approve, they will actively disapprove of her and, cut her to the quick. I think the thing that was most shocking for us was how early it starts, and that it doesn't just start in the classroom, on the sports field, or online. It's happening in all three of these places at different stages of our life.
Wow. So we really, in the next generations, we could see an amplification of this fear of failure in females due to
Yes.
social media, and no one's really addressing that yet.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've heard since the book came out is the number one piece of feedback that I've gotten is, I'm buying this for my daughter and my daughters-in-law. It's a book about women and failure, but women are reading it and saying, had I known this at, 10, 20, 30, I could have saved myself an awful lot of heartache. And so it's not something that I intended to be a parenting book, but it turns out it's a parenting book.
That's amazing. Well, I have 2 daughters, one that's 27 who has had a huge setback in her life, in the last 6
Mm.
months. She lost the father of her children to leukemia, and so
Oh,
she's
I'm
had a
so sorry.
very difficult time, bouncing back from it. She truly is shattered right now, and it's for me, I'm thinking, "Well, I don't know." I mean, I grew up without social media. I didn't have as much of the failure conditioning. My mother was quite the Renaissance woman and quite different than most moms.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been really hard to watch her. But then the same with my daughter. She's in kindergarten and she was diagnosed with dyslexia this year. And the same
Mm.
thing that, mommy, I don't really want to go to school. They're going to test me and I'm not going to be able to perform as well as the other kids. So I see this
Yeah,
in both of my daughters right now in different ways. One's 5, one's
absolutely.
27, but I'm seeing this behavior in both of them. So thank you for explaining how social media is sort of amplifying this
Yeah,
already pre-existing condition in
that's
women.
right. That's right. And I'm thinking, so first of all, my heart goes out to both of your daughters. Those are tough things to deal with, and, for very different reasons. And, one of the things we talk about in the bounce back part of the book is the importance of grieving your failure. Right. And so for your older daughter, this is what's known as a circumstantial failure. So it's something that happened through absolutely no fault of her own. It's something that happened to her. That's one kind of grief, is when the world is just unfair. And, for your younger daughter, too, it's also a circumstantial failure. She didn't, bring this onto herself. The world treated her unfairly, and she's, dealing with the consequences of it. For both of them, I can imagine that they might be talking about a second kind of failure too, which is called an identity failure, where you start to wonder, like, who am I in the face of this loss? Maybe the
Yes.
loss of being, seen as neurotypical, or the loss of being, a wife or partner. So we
Yes.
talk about 5 different kinds of failure in the book, and some failures are all 5 kinds: concrete, circumstantial, identity, paralysis failure, and perceived failure, which is when, the world says you're a failure, even though you're doing something right for yourself.
Wow, it's really profound. I'm seeing this is a very important message right now for young women, especially and mothers who are raising
Mm.
young women in a very different world. Social media has really changed the parenting game. Now your research is bringing up even more evidence that now we're now amplifying something that was already not great and needs to be addressed in young women. So when
Yes.
you say women personalize failure, what does that actually look like in real life?
What that looks like is that women see themselves as the catalysts for their failure. So I wasn't good enough. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't prepared enough. I didn't plan well enough. My expectations were too high. My expectations were too low, dot, dot, dot. Right. So there's a big I in the center of failure, which, well, there is an I in the center of failure. But there's a big, sense about, I was the engine of this failure without recognizing that failure happens in a system, right? We certainly want to take accountability for our role in something not turning out the way we had planned or hoped for, but it often isn't only ourselves that are part of it. So, an example would be childcare in our country is a terrible failure of the system. And
Yes.
when women have a caregiver crisis, they think about, I didn't do enough, right? I didn't do enough to make sure that my kids had the care that they needed. I fell short. I didn't carve out enough time, as opposed to realizing maybe you had some hand in it, but we've got a huge system failure here, and that is not something that you want to shoulder the blame for.
Yeah, I know that's another one that we talk about on my show a lot is, if women are expected to work, which they very much are expected to work in our society,
Mm-hmm.
the elephant in the room is the fact that it costs a woman about $20 an hour in childcare for her
Mm-hmm.
to go to work, and she is in no way compensated or offset for that cost of her to go to work. So, I mean,
Right.
we have a huge systems failure for women when it comes to childcare. And then we really don't have adequate systems around childcare either. There should be a much better, more comprehensive childcare system in the United States.
Absolutely.
Because
Agreed. Agreed.
if women are to work in society, then we must accommodate that in some way. And at this point, I see my 27-year-old really struggling with that now as a single mom. She has a
Mm.
7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And it's
Oh
like,
boy.
how do you work? And
Yeah,
her
exactly.
younger son is neurodivergent. And so it's like, what are you supposed to do? Childcare
Right.
is so expensive that she goes to work. Maybe she makes $30 an hour and then she has to pay taxes on that. But it costs her $20 an hour to pay her babysitter. And it's,
It's outrageous. And
pennies.
and a woman is more likely to say, I should be doing this better. Why don't I have a handle on this? I am failing my kids. And that turns into feelings of shame. And
Yes.
we know that feelings of shame can kill.
Mhm.
We want to be really, really careful about taking accountability and responsibility for our role, but not being overly accountable and overly responsible for things that are failures of the system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important that we as women stand together when there's a failure in the system rather than a failure
Yes.
in ourselves. And right
Yes.
now, the failure in motherhood within the American system right now is childcare. If women are
Absolutely.
to work, they must have childcare.
You're absolutely right. And one of the other things that really struck us in our research was we had heard anecdotally about this phenomenon called the confidence gap, that women feel less confident than their male counterparts do. What we found in digging into the research is that there is less of a confidence gap and there is more of a consequence gap. That when a woman fails, the consequences for a woman more severe, they're quicker, more severe, and longer lasting, such that if a woman in a leadership role has a failure in that role, the organization is unlikely to hire another woman in that leadership role again. And there is almost a 0% margin of error for women of color.
Wow. I have seen that. I honestly have. I've
Yeah.
seen that within the corporate world. I very
Yeah.
much have seen that. I do feel like we as women kind of carry the weight for other women.
Uh-huh.
We're representing women as a whole when we go into a room that's filled with men. I've done it myself many, many
Yeah.
times. Yeah, there you do. I feel the weight of, being the representative for an entire gender at times.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's funny. I am certainly a victim of it myself. I was giving a talk earlier in the week and somebody asked me a question about, like, so what do we do to change the system? And I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't figured out how to change the system. Am I a failure that I wrote a book that hasn't figured out how to change the system? And I was said, hold on, gather yourself, learn your lessons, read the book, right? And said, no, I'm not a failure because I haven't figured out how to change the system.
No.
I would be failing if I pretended I had it figured out, and I'd be failing if I avoided the question. But no, I'm not a failure for not having figured out how to change the system.
No, and I think right now what we as women need to be doing is just having these kinds of conversations so that we
Yeah.
as a collective can figure out how we change the system. I don't think it's going to be be one person who's going to have the answer. I
Yeah.
think that it's probably going to be more of a collective response, hopefully, as we
Agreed.
create a larger conversation with a larger group of women. I think that there's going to be a lot of voices and a lot of really great minds behind this as we, it's just, if we don't talk about it, we're never going to fix it.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah. So it's, we start there. We start with the conversation and then we go
And we're
everywhere
having it,
else.
which I'm thrilled about. Yeah.
This is very interesting. Do you think this connects to the invisible labor that women carry in our homes, where we feel responsible for outcomes that we don't fully control?
So I think any place where we feel responsible for outcomes that we don't fully control is a breeding ground for feelings of failure. I want to just put out there, because I feel that it's important for me to say that my husband does more invisible and visible labor than I do.
Good job.
And
That means
so
you're an adequate communicator, because I feel like men want to help us, but when we keep the invisible labor invisible, we're not really communicating with our partners how they can be adequate partners, how we have to
yeah,
kind of teach them how to help us with the mental load of the house, which is the
yeah.
knowing how to do things without us telling them to do them, right? So it's like maybe at some point early on in our relationship, if we have those conversations with them, like these are the things that need to be done every week. We've got trash that needs to be taken out, trash cans need to go out on
Mhm.
this day. Maybe you can own that. I don't know. Did you have those kinds of conversations with him, or was he
No,
just
and
intuitive?
he just had it handled. And I think two things happened. Number one is, he was raised in a home with a really equal division of labor. And number two was, for the bulk of our lives together, I was on the road and he
Hmm.
was home. He had a job, but he was the parent who had to be more flexible, because if I was in China, I couldn't pick the kids up from school. So as a result of him growing up in a household with a, division of labor where he saw that, both men and women take care of the household tasks. And because it was out of necessity, I just wasn't there, he overperforms in that way. And let's put it this way, we're married almost 28 years. I have not done laundry in 28 years, which is kind of an amazing
Deb,
thing to have happen. Yeah.
congratulations for that. That's
Thank you. I married
amazing.
very well. I married
Yes, you
very well.
did. You did.
So I am happy to talk about invisible labor, but I have to out myself by saying that I won the lottery when it comes to, domestic division of responsibilities in my house. But
That's
yes,
amazing.
it is certainly something that, contributes to feelings of failure, especially when you're supposed to be able to have it all and do it all. You can't have it all and do it all if there's a whole bunch of stuff you're supposed to be doing that other people can't see.
Yes.
Right? Other people can't see, that other people don't register, that other people aren't tracking as a place where you might need some help.
Mhm.
And so if you're doing a whole bunch of things that people can't see, it means you have less time, energy, and resources available for the things people can see, which is where we are, likely externally to be judged on success or failure. But our ability to do those sort of non-promotable tasks are one of the places where we judge ourselves on success or failure.
Absolutely. Yeah, sometimes I look at it like Cinderella. It's like, yes, you can go to the ball, but first you have to, do
Yes.
X, Y, and Z. And
Yeah.
so you're so lucky, you've probably been so successful because you've had a partner who's willing to
A
carry
hundred
the mental
percent.
load with you. The mental
A
load is
100%.
everything.
The
Yes.
mental load, the physical load, the childcare load, the household load, the emotional intelligence load, the support load. I think you're absolutely right that I attribute having a very, very supportive partner to me being successful, and equally as important, if not more important, happy.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Happy is so important. Happy wife,
Yes.
happy life. What a good
Yeah.
man.
Although I did just hear on, I was watching an episode of Love on the Spectrum, and somebody's dad said, "Happy wife, happy life," and one of the young men said, "That's so old fashioned. You have to say happy spouse, happy house."
That's cute.
And I love that. So happy spouse, happy house.
I love that. So let's see. One of the things I see a lot with women is the mental replay. I'm seeing this in my older daughter too, the overthinking. Can you walk us
Yes.
through what's actually happening physiologically when women ruminate on failure?
Yes. And so, by the way, not my last book, but my book 2 books ago was called Overcoming Overthinking, that I co-wrote with my daughter because we are both highly skilled and committed overthinkers. So we definitely have a lot of expertise in this topic. But what happens is if you think about replaying something, you get this neural pathway that just gets this grooves embedded in it, and it makes the thoughts faster and easier to keep cycling throughout your brain. This sort of replay that happens then becomes habituated, right? It goes from sort of a casual replay to a habit of a replay, and it leads to feelings of shame and blame and guilt and self-loathing and low self-esteem. So it's really pretty detrimental to constantly be replaying, what's happening. One of the things that we, also found in our research is that women tend to be catastrophizers. And catastrophic thinking has 3 components. The first component of catastrophic thinking is overestimating the likelihood of unlikely events. The second part of catastrophic thinking is overestimating how devastating those events would be if they happened. And number 3 is underestimating the resources we have available to us should they happen. With many of the women that I speak with and coach, I invite them to think about the third category, which is the resources, which is if you can build up either your belief in your resources or the resources themselves to know that if something terrible should happen, I've got family, I've got friends, I've got therapists, I've got coaches, I've got a team of people who will help me through this. And I'm imagining both of your daughters may be finding that they've got resources available to help them through these setbacks. If you can get some faith in your resources, then it can start to mitigate the fact that we're imagining the worst possible thing and how terrible that thing would be if it happened.
Yeah, absolutely. For my little girl, it would be like, we're so lucky. My 16-year-old also has very bad dyslexia, like probably one of the worst cases I've ever seen. But we actually bought our house near a school and a center that helps dyslexic kids.
Amazing.
That was founded by a woman who had a dyslexic daughter. Her daughter's now 30, and a mother and all of the things, but it's
Yeah.
so lucky to have that massive resource here for her. So it was one of the first things I did was, let's go talk to Miss Kathy. Let's go see Kathy Johnson. She'll figure it out, baby. Don't worry about it. And
Yeah.
then
Oh, I love that.
you know, Miss
Resources,
Kath
resources, resources. Yes.
she's got you. And so we're hopping into reading therapy for her. And so she'll have lots of resources to be able to get through her learning, give her some tools because
Yes.
dyslexic kids just learn in a different way. So it's,
Yeah.
giving her the tools to learn in the way that her brain works. So
That's
we'll get her
amazing.
there.
Good
And
job,
then,
Mama.
yeah, fortunately not my first rodeo with dyslexia, thank God.
True.
So we get a little better the more kids you have, you a little more resources there. And with my older daughter, it was one of the things we're talking about is EMDR. I had done a
Mhm.
great EMDR session with a woman in Oceanside, and I'm going to schedule in 6 weeks. I'll have her back in town. She just left. She's in Texas. And my daughter will be back. So I'm going to have her do an intensive EMDR session just because I really think that'll help. I think she really has post-traumatic stress
I can
because
imagine.
of the way that he died, being in the
Mm.
hospital, seeing someone like that in that state of being. I think she's really traumatized by it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for her
Yeah.
loss and
It's
and everybody's loss. It happened to
yeah.
the family, not just to her.
Yes.
And I think, one of the important things that we need to do if we're going to build up our resources is be willing to talk about what's happening. Apropos of your daughter's situation, we had a loss about a year and a half ago. Our very close family friend passed away really very young. I was talking about the loss that I felt, and a colleague of mine said, so I'm in North Carolina, said, Duke University offers 6 free grief counseling sessions to anyone in the community who needs it. I said, what? She said,
Wow.
oh, yeah, when my father died, I took advantage of it. I would have had no idea that was available. And so that was a resource that I availed myself of, but I wouldn't have known about it if I was hiding feelings of sadness. I just wouldn't have known.
Yeah, the more we talk, it is. The communication is key. You're the communication
Yeah.
expert, so you're right. The more we communicate
You got
what
a
we
bunch of
need.
kids. You're a communication expert too.
You have to be. They teach you how to
Yeah,
be communication experts. You might not have
they
been
sure do.
before, but
Right.
now I am. It took me a while. So, is there a practical way that we can interrupt a loop when we get into that kind of failure loop?
So, one of the things that we recommend, and this is in the third part of the book where we're talking about bouncing back from failure. So, we have this three stages, which is about ground, gather, and go. And in the grounding, the sort of key phrase is no sudden movements. When you are experiencing a failure, what you are going to want to do, every cell in your body is going to want to get rid of it, move past it, shake it off, brush it off. But in fact, we suggest that the first thing you do is just pause. No sudden movements, just take a beat, pause, ground yourself, physically and emotionally. And then we advise people, as I might have mentioned before, to really grieve the hopes and plans and expectations that you had for something that didn't happen the way you wanted it to, is to really allow yourself to grieve and to name neutrally how you're feeling, right? And one of the things that women do a lot of is judging their feelings. So have you ever thought to yourself like, oh, I'm so frustrated that I'm so tired all the time, right? I'm so
Yes.
angry that I'm so sad, right? That's not helpful. That's not helpful to blame yourself for how you're feeling. Emotions are data, and we should just treat them as data and be willing to look at them without making ourselves wrong for feeling how we're feeling. I think one of the sort of reader favorite tools, this is some of the feedback that I'm hearing, one of the reader favorite tools is something called a portfolio of selves. And this is a tool that I learned from an Adam Grant podcast. And the idea is that when you fail, one of your selves has been rejected. Right? So the part of you that was an entrepreneur that wrote a proposal and the proposal failed, your entrepreneurial self today got rejected. Not all of you got rejected. So if I think about writing a proposal that failed, I'm willing to say, entrepreneur Deb had a failure today. But Mom Deb is still cooking. Dog Mom Deb is crushing it. Wife Deb is doing a great job. Aunt Deb is showing up well. Niece Deb is doing, a fantastic job. Coach Deb is still showing up for her clients, right? I have all of these selves. Then we have to recognize when one of our selves gets rejected, we get to double down on the selves that haven't been rejected.
Yeah, I love that, actually. I love that. I do. I rely on mom Aimee a lot. My Aimee
I
mom,
can imagine.
I'm like, okay, I can crush it at this. And it might not be with every single kid all the time, but I'm like,
Right.
oh, I'm crushing it with that one right now. Good job.
That's right. That's right. And so to remember, like, it's that you got to recognize and reward and cheerlead the parts of you that haven't failed and aren't rejected, because they will be tomorrow. But for today, you can draw strength from them.
Yes, I love that. That's brilliant. And in a lot of ways, you're describing this loop in a lot of ways, almost like this shame spiral. It sounds almost like you're getting addicted to this storytelling in your mind. And
Oh,
it's going
people get
into
very
it seems,
addicted.
yeah, it seems like it's going into more of the reptilian, like older part of the brain, the fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain, and
Yeah.
getting out of the neocortex. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. I mean, we are wired to avoid losses, right? We are wired to avoid pain rather than go towards wins or go towards pleasure. And a failure is a loss, right? It is a
Mhm.
loss of something you hoped for, planned, or wanted. And so we get really, really activated when we register a loss. And you're absolutely right that, our amygdala hijacks us, and our prefrontal cortex, the part of us that's responsible for decision making, problem solving, clear communication, collaborating with others, is not functioning for as long as our amygdala is saying, danger, danger, danger. And so we have to, the idea of naming it to tame it, name it to tame it, say, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling disappointed. All of a sudden, that can start to get you back into your prefrontal cortex just by the process of naming it.
Wow, that's so cool. You're right, because you're giving it to the language center, back to the language center of the brain, which is in the prefrontal frontal cortex.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah,
pulling it out of that
exactly.
old part, that ancient unspeaking part of the brain and bringing it up to the
Yeah.
part of your brain that talks now.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's also really important to keep in mind that, like, our brain doesn't really register the difference between the pain of social rejection, which is what a
Mhm.
failure can often feel like, and the pain of twisting your ankle, right? The pain center of the brain lights up regardless of which kind of pain it is.
Yes.
And so that's why we want to grieve, is to give ourselves credit for having experienced real pain.
Yeah, that's so I was watching a social media clip at one point, and it was about emotion and how when something
Mm.
happens, you're actually experiencing the emotion of it happening, and it's only about 30 seconds of that real
Mm.
emotion of that thing happening to you, and then whatever you experience after that is just a remembrance of that
Mm.
feeling,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
That
So it's
tracks.
yeah, that tracks, right? So it's I'm
Yeah.
always the more you're kind of ruminating on this thing that happened and now you're turning into a story and
Yes.
it's really
Yes.
turning into this story and it's getting it's now becoming this thing that it really wasn't
Yeah,
more
that's
than
right.
it
And
was.
we do a lot of work with clients around separating the fact from the story they make up about the fact, right? So the fact may be, I didn't get the promotion. One story could be, I didn't get the promotion because I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I didn't work hard enough. I didn't play politics well, dot, dot, dot. Another story could be, it wasn't my time. Another story could be, there was somebody who was more qualified. Another story could be, I prepared, but maybe not as prepared as I could have been, right? There are infinite number of stories. But yes, once we are wired to make up a story about, I did wrong, I did wrong, I did wrong, it just becomes a mental habit, a mental shortcut.
Yeah, and also, Ganga Ji, I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She was like
No.
she's a white Indian guru lady, but she was
Okay.
around quite a while ago, but she always talks about how the ego uses story to kind of attach to. So you can see how
Mm.
the ego, once the ego attaches to this story, then it really becomes personalized. I
Yeah,
can see that. And so you're right,
absolutely.
the more we ruminate on something, the more it's becoming part of us.
That's
Rather
right.
than
That's right.
like, something that just happened out there in the universe around us.
Yep, and that's why that's goes right back into women treating failure as their identity rather than an event,
Yes.
right? Failure is not
Yes.
a verdict on who you are. It is an event that happened to you. And maybe it happened and you had a hand in it. Sometimes, and we heard plenty of stories about this, it's something that happened for you that you can't see in the moment. Right. And I
Yes.
am anti toxic positivity, right? I'm never going to tell someone, look on the bright side, see the silver lining in here. You have no idea how this is going to turn out for you, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to say any of those things. And we heard countless stories of women saying, this failure happened for me. The universe did for me, or my boss did for me, or this company did for me, or this partner did for me what
Mhm.
I was not doing for myself. And it didn't feel that way in the moment. It sure didn't. But eventually it revealed its gifts.
Yes, for me, I can say that's absolutely been true, and it was within my
Mm.
partnership that some of the failures and some of the biggest, scariest things that have happened in my life within my relationships have kinda, like, unlocked parts of me that strength that I didn't even know that was there,
Mm.
abilities within me that I didn't even know were there, so sometimes, you never know what's gonna happen when something changes, you
Yes,
know? When
that's
a
true.
big change happens in your life, then you're gonna experience change in some way.
Yes,
So,
yes. And the catastrophizers think they know, right? I know exactly how this is going to go. It's going to be the worst possible thing and it's going to take me down to the quick and that sort of thing. But that's just a story. That habit, that neural pathway that's been, beautifully carved.
yes. Okay, so let's get into bounce, don't shatter. I love this concept so much. What does it actually mean to bounce back? Like in a healthy, empowered way, not just to push through or suppress?
Yes, yes. So if I'm being honest, what we really want people to do is bounce forward.
Yes.
But we love the alliteration of bounce back. So, what this means is that you are ready, willing, and able, not all at once, not too quickly, but that you become ready, willing, and able to go again. And there's this wonderful quote that I will, of course, get wrong by Tina Fey, who says, you can't be that kid standing at the top of the water slide. Eventually, you have to go down the chute. That's what we're talking about, is that you can't just stand there wondering what will happen if you try try again differently, try again with different timing, with different people, with different learning, with different lessons, with a different approach, but try something again so that you can examine the variables, but have taught yourself that you are capable of resilience and recovery.
Absolutely. And use your prior failure as data so you can
As
do
data.
better. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the book, we tell stories of many, many business leaders who had, front of the Wall Street Journal failures and had to use those failures as data to help them create something more fabulous.
I love that. And because honestly, how can we know how to do something without failing at all? You don't learn to walk without falling down.
Right. Right. Failing is the engine of learning.
Yes. And I always tell my kids, like, don't fail. Like, you're not failing. You had to babble before you could talk. You had to
That's
crawl and
right.
fall down before you could walk.
Right.
There is no such thing as failure in our house. I really try to keep
Yeah.
it like, that's just learning. So what
It's
are the
just
key,
learning.
it's just learning, right? Just
Yeah.
learning. What are the key behaviors or mindset shifts of women who bounce well?
Ah, beautiful. For women who bounce well, what we really are doing is we're talking about making a shift from a caution culture to a courage culture. One shift is this shift from verdict to information, right? That this failure is a verdict on who I am, and shifting from verdict to information of what can I learn from this failure that's going to help me move to the next step, to the next level. A second mindset shift that we recognize is from crisis to calibration. So the idea that every single failure is a 5-alarm emergency. No, every single failure is not a 5-alarm emergency. It could be a problem, it could be a setback, it could be a mistake, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the end of the world for you. And then this third mindset shift that we write about is from shame to strategy. So separating your experience of failing from your identity of who you are as a leader, as a partner, as a parent, as a ... And so verdict to information, crisis to calibration, shame to strategy. Those are 3 of the mindset shifts that we talk about in the book.
Those are awesome. What a great gift for women this book is. Ah, Deb, good
Thank
job.
you. Thank you.
Entrepreneurship and failure. A lot of my audience are entrepreneurs or stepping into leadership. What's your advice for women who are building something when failure is basically inevitable?
Beautiful. I love how you said that. Let's start with failure is basically inevitable, right? So start with that as the foundation and assume that failure will be a necessary part on the path to success. So it's not about avoiding failure. I mean, it's about avoiding avoidable failures. It's about embracing intelligent failures, the kind that help you iterate and move from good to great and great to exceptional. And so I think that's a really, really important distinction to make. And we have a very quick language exercise in the book, which is, a lot of people think about, well, what if I fail? And so we invite people to think about, even if I fail, ... right? Even if I fail, I can still have a successful business. Even if I fail, I still can have, the team that I'm looking for. Even if I fail, ... because failure is going to happen.
In our companies, my husband and I we have a term called adjust and conquer, because a lot of
Love
times
it.
in business, it's not even like a failure, but it's like sometimes the system changes and you will have to make a shift in your model to accommodate the changes in the system. For example, when COVID hit, we had to make a shift.
Yep.
And during that time, so we looked at each other and we're like, time for AC. That means adjust and conquer. And we're like, yeah,
I
let's
love it.
AC.
Yeah, I love it. So yeah, we want people to flex their change muscles, to be versatile and adaptable, and again to recognize that the failures that you have in business are not about you being a failure. They are events, they are not identities.
Yes, I love that. And is there a way to reframe failure so it becomes an asset instead of a threat?
How about just that? Failure is my asset. It is not a threat. I think you put it perfectly, right? And for anybody who's saying like, well, I can't believe that think about how many times you believe the worst to create that neural pathway. You're going to have to do some what I call glow casting, right? So imagining a really positive, compelling vision of the future and put that into your brain and let that run its path through your brain. Do some, I guess another term for it is pronoid rather than paranoid, right? So if paranoid is the belief that things are out to get me, pronoid is the belief that things are there to serve me and things are working for me.
Yeah, and I've really experienced this. I've had 5 home births, safe,
Oh
beautiful
my
births.
gosh.
But birth will really teach you about the brain and how powerful your imagination is. So I would spend my
Mm,
entire pregnancy imagining everything going perfectly, seeing it all,
mm,
really never allowing my imagination to go to the place where, it would allow fear and create the worst case scenario, no
yeah.
catastrophes, no ideas about that. So for me, it's so funny what my actual motherhood life has taught me about business and mindset.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I do think that there are people, myself included, who benefit from mental rehearsal, right? And so mental rehearsal, it can be, what will I do if it goes wrong? And also, what will I do if it doesn't? I think, to know what kind of rehearsal works best for you is really important.
I love that. That's beautiful. So I shared this story with you about my mom. She had this massive success, started the world's first mail order pharmaceutical company, and then she
Amazing.
lost everything. And then she had to rebuild again. So in your experience, how important is it for women to actually learn how to fail?
That's why I wrote the book and why Fiona wrote the book, my co-author. It is incredibly important for women to learn how to fail. It is incredibly important for women to learn that every person fails. And one of our key missions on this book is for women to be willing to talk about it. Because if we don't talk about it, then we don't know that other people and women are failing, and we keep it to ourselves and we assume that we are just the worst and that we are messing things up and nobody else is messing things up as awfully as we are messing things up. So please give yourself the gift of authenticity and vulnerability and talk to people who create a safe space for you about your failure, because you will find out right away that you are not alone.
I love that. And what happens when we've never been allowed to fail?
Oh, well, when you're never allowed to fail, then you absolutely don't know how to bounce back. I had originally approached my daughter Sophie about writing this book with me. We've written 2 other books before. She was 22 at the time when I approached her about this book. And I said, "Do you want to write this book with me about women in failure?" And she said, "I've never failed at anything before, so I'm not really a credible resource." And I said, "That terrifies me." I said, "If you've never failed, then you don't know how to fail and you don't know how to bounce back. So go out there and take some big, bold risks and go mess a whole bunch of stuff up and then come back and report back, and I will be here to hear your stories." And so she's taken a lot of big, bold risks since then, has had a lot of success and a few failures along the way. But if we don't fail, we don't know that we can, and we don't know how to bounce back.
Oh, it's so true. I know. I really do wish more mothers would encourage their daughters to fail. Like, go out and do
Yeah.
something big and give it a try. And if you fall down, that's just as good as as not falling down. Honestly, I've learned
Yeah.
more from
Yeah.
my failures in business than I have from my successes.
Totally. Absolutely. When I think about every big, growth point that I've had in my business, it has been because something failed, whether it was a concrete failure, whether it was a circumstantial failure, a paralysis failure, some kind of failure. That big boom happened because of a bust.
Heck yeah. Oh my gosh, even in the beginning of my show, I really refined my method with my guests and my interviews and my guests because of one
Mm,
guest who I interviewed and I didn't have a great pre-interview with her, and it was just like, ugh. And it was that failure of that episode that really
mm,
allowed me, we have to be honest about the fact
of
that we don't
course.
always do things perfectly, especially when
Right.
we're learning how to do something new. And so it's like, but we're going to keep refining our
We're going to
processes.
keep refining it. Yes, exactly. I mean, that's the whole point of failing, right? Is to learn and get better.
Yeah, I love it. I love what you're talking about here. It's right up my alley. So let's talk about leadership and AI in the modern world. Given the pace of
Okay.
change right now with AI technology and everything shifting, how important is our relationship with failure in this next era of leadership?
So let me start by saying I'm absolutely not an expert on this topic. But what I will say is the ground is going to be shifting under us really, really quickly. And if you have an unhealthy relationship with failure where you see failure as as a verdict on your character, as opposed to something that happens when you are learning to get better, you are going to be in a lot of pain because the world and technology is changing so fast that failure is absolutely inevitable. And so I can't even imagine all the different ways in which I will fail as, AI and leadership, converge. But I know that I know how to fail in a smart way and that I have a track record of bouncing back from my failures and that I have a track record of learning how to compartmentalize a failure in one area from failures in other areas of my work and life. And so I think having a really healthy relationship with failure is going to be important.
I couldn't agree more. I see a lot of women right now that are so scared to even try AI. Like they've
Yeah.
never even tried it because they're afraid they're gonna
Yeah.
not be good at it. And so,
Yeah.
so
Well, you
we
won't be if you never try it.
that's right. Yeah, you might you can't really mess up AI anyway. You're just gonna it's gonna teach you. You're gonna learn it. You're gonna teach it. It's gonna teach you. But do you think fear of failure could hold women back from participating and shaping the future?
Yes, full stop.
Yeah. Yeah, I worry about that too. So your book is really important for the future of female leadership because if we don't address this fear, this underlying fear of failure that we have as women, and we're at such a pivotal time in human civilization where women are really going to decide, are we going to close this pay gap between men and women using
Mm,
technology, or is it going to widen because of
yeah.
women's, failure to adopt the new
Mm-hmm.
technology?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to let the fact that we may not be able to fundamentally overhaul a system today or tomorrow. I wouldn't want that to let that get in the way of stopping trying.
Right.
I would want
Yeah,
people to try, and it can't just be women alone. It has to be women and allies.
absolutely. Yeah, I see new associations popping up. I just joined the board of the National Association of Women in AI, which is
Oh,
going to be
wonderful.
teaching women AI, but also working in with AI policy as well, which I think,
Amazing. Thank
you
you for
know,
doing that.
absolutely. It needs to be done. It's the world that we're living in now. So we've got to jump right in as women and get involved.
Yes, absolutely. I think, well, and you are definitely putting your money where your mouth is.
Definitely. So let's talk about some practical tools and make this really
Okay.
tangible. What are two or
Yes.
three things a woman can start doing today to change her relationship with failure?
You can identify when you're engaged in catastrophic thinking, where your brain starts calculating unlikely disasters as likely disasters and shift that to courageous thinking and asking, what information does this give me, and treating the situation as data as opposed to a verdict. Number two is to stop setting impossible standards for yourself where anything less than perfection equals failure, where you get into compare and despair territory. You want to shift into achievable standards, advocating for yourself and your boundaries and your priorities, and recognizing that a commitment to perfection means that you will always be procrastinating. It will never be good enough. You will never be good enough. You'll never know when to start, and you'll never be able to stop. And then the third one is recognizing that more research, more planning, more preparing instead of acting doesn't prevent failure. The more you fear failure, the more you delay what could actually prevent it, which is action. And so to take small, deliberate moves forward and aim for progress rather than perfection.
Yes. Gosh, those are beautiful words. Yeah. You're not going to be able to do everything in one day, but you might still
Yeah.
be able to take one little bite out of that whale today.
Take one little bite.
One
Yeah,
little bite.
exactly. And consider it a win.
Yes. Yes, I love it. So we're gonna go rapid fire. What's
Okay.
one failure that shaped you the most?
When my business failed in 2008 and 2009 because of the housing crisis, the mortgage crisis, and the Madoff crisis, that absolutely shaped me. I ended up taking a job in China, which 100% changed the trajectory of my life and business.
Whoa. One belief about failure that you had to unlearn.
That other people are judging me for it.
One sentence every woman should remember in the middle of a setback.
Ooh, I love that. This says nothing about who I am.
I love that. You are amazing, Deb. Thank you so much for being on my
Thank
show
you so
today.
much.
Yes, this conversation felt so important because I think so many women are walking around carrying the weight of the things that they were
Mm,
never fully theirs to hold. And when we start
amen.
yeah, when we start to understand that, when we start to separate who we are from what happened, everything changes. Deb, your work is giving women a new language and honesty and a new level of freedom around failure.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for being here. If you love this episode, girls, I highly recommend checking out Deborah's new book, Aim High and Bounce Back, especially if you've ever found yourself or a friend stuck in that loop of overthinking or self blame. Also, if you're a mom, this sounds like a mother of a daughter. Sounds like the book is a must read for us. I know I'll be getting myself a copy. And as always, if this conversation resonated with you, please share it with another woman who needs to hear it, because this is how we shift the narrative. Thank you so much. And I will see you girls next week.